The Thunder Bay Air Show was supposed to showcase America's finest pilots. Instead, it became the stage where Captain Sarah Mitchell proved that sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one flying against you, it's the one they never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Nevada desert stretched endlessly beyond the chain-link perimeter of Falcon Ridge Air Base, its morning silence broken only by the distant hum of preparation. Inside Hangar 7, where the shadows fell longest and the fluorescent lights buzzed with irregular persistence, Captain Sarah Mitchell walked her solitary rounds among aircraft that would never see the Thunder Bay Air Show. Her boots echoed against the polished concrete, each step measured and deliberate. The clipboard in her weathered hands contained a security checklist that had become more ritual than necessity, a paper trail documenting the presence of someone the base had systematically forgotten. The hangar housed the exhibition aircraft, the vintage warbirds and experimental prototypes deemed too valuable to risk in active competition, too fragile to trust with anyone but the most expendable guardian. Sarah paused beside a pristine P-51 Mustang, its silver fuselage reflecting the harsh overhead lighting. Her fingers traced the edge of a wing panel, feeling the smoothness of metal that had been lovingly restored but never tested. Behind her, the massive doors remained sealed, cutting off the view of the main runway, where her former squadron mates were already running pre-flight checks on their F-16 Falcons. 3 months ago, she had been scheduled to lead the Thunderhawks formation team in the most prestigious air show on the West Coast. Her name had been printed on programs, her photograph displayed alongside the other elite pilots who would represent American air superiority to an audience of 50,000 spectators and military officials from allied nations. The Thunder Bay Air Show wasn't just entertainment. It was diplomacy written in contrails across the sky. But that was before the incident report landed on Colonel Bradley Harrison's desk. Before the closed-door hearing that lasted exactly 14 minutes. Before her squadron designation was quietly transferred to Captain Marcus Webb, a pilot with half her flight hours, but twice her political connections. The official record stated that Captain Mitchell had violated protocol during the training exercise, endangering civilian aircraft in controlled airspace. The unofficial truth was more complicated, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and career-protecting signatures. Sarah had spotted a maintenance irregularity in her F-16's targeting system during a routine sortie, a glitch that could have caused catastrophic failure during the precision maneuvers required for airshow demonstration. Her decision to abort the mission and document the flaw had been technically correct, but politically disastrous. The maintenance issue was real. The targeting computer had indeed been improperly calibrated, a fact confirmed by 3 separate inspections. But the timing of her discovery had been inconvenient. The base was under pressure to deliver a flawless performance at Thunder Bay, with congressional funding for the next fiscal year partially dependent on demonstrating operational excellence. Sarah's meticulous attention to detail had highlighted a problem that threatened to ground the entire squadron 2 weeks before their most important mission. Rather than acknowledge the safety concern, the command structure had chosen a different path. Sarah's report was reclassified as evidence of excessive caution bordering on insubordination. Her flight status was suspended pending psychological evaluation. The evaluation, conducted by a base psychiatrist who had never flown anything more complex than a Cessna, concluded that Captain Mitchell displayed perfectionist tendencies incompatible with high-pressure operational environments. The squadron moved forward without her. The maintenance issue was quietly resolved with a software patch that corrected the calibration error. No one mentioned that Sarah had been right. No one acknowledged that her vigilance had potentially prevented a disaster that could have killed not just the pilot, but spectators on the ground. The narrative became simpler, cleaner, A pilot who couldn't handle pressure had been appropriately reassigned to duties better suited to her temperament. Now she walked among museum pieces, her security clearance sufficient to guard aircraft that would never fly but insufficient to pilot the jets screaming overhead in practice formations. Through the small windows set high in the hangar walls, she could see the contrails of her replacement unit as they rehearsed the diamond formation that she had helped design. The irony wasn't lost on her. Hangar 7 contained some of the most historically significant aircraft in the Air Force inventory. The P-51 beside her had flown combat missions over Europe in 1944. Near the back wall sat an F-86 Sabre that had engaged MAGs over Korea, its fuselage bearing faded victory marks from aerial battles that had helped define the jet age. In the center of the space, covered by a gray tarp and surrounded by orange safety cones, was her current responsibility, a prototype F-20 Tiger Shark that had never entered full production, but represented one of the most advanced fighter designs of the 1980s. Sarah approached the covered aircraft, her footsteps slowing as she reached the perimeter of safety cones. The F-20 had been her obsession during her time at test pilot school, before politics and protocol had redirected her career toward more conventional assignments. She had written her thesis on the aircraft's advanced fly-by-wire system, analyzing how its simplified maintenance requirements and superior maneuverability could have revolutionized air combat if not for defense procurement politics that favored the more expensive F-16. The tarp concealed an aircraft that was, in many ways, superior to anything currently flying in American service. Its single General Electric F404 engine provided thrust-to-weight ratios that exceeded even modern fighters. Its avionics package, though dated by today's standards, had been revolutionary for its era. Most importantly, its design philosophy prioritized pilot interface and mechanical reliability over computerized complexity. Sarah lifted one corner of the tarp, revealing the sharp nose cone and angular air intake of the fighter. The aircraft's paint scheme was unmarked, lacking the bright colors and sponsor logos that adorned the exhibition aircraft. It looked predatory, purposeful, like a weapon rather than a display piece. According to the maintenance log she had reviewed, the F-20 was fully operational, its systems maintained to museum standards but certified for flight. The sound of jet engines grew louder overhead, followed by the distinctive whistle of aircraft in steep descent. Through the hangar's small windows, Sarah could see her former squadron practicing the tactical demonstration that would close the Thunder Bay Air Show. 8 F-16s in tight formation, executing rolls and vertical climbs that showcased American air power to an international audience. She had designed that routine. Every maneuver, every transition, every split-second timing cue had been her creation, refined through months of computer modeling and test flights. Captain Webb was flying her choreography, executing her vision, receiving credit for her innovation. The crowd at Thunder Bay would applaud his leadership, never knowing that the pilot who had crafted their spectacle was locked away in a hangar, reduced to counting rivets on aircraft that existed only to remind visitors of past glories. But Sarah had not spent 3 months in exile merely counting inventory. Her engineering background and test pilot training had given her access to technical manuals that most security guards would never think to request. She had studied every system, every component, every operational parameter of the aircraft under her care. The F-20 Tiger Shark was not just her responsibility, it had become her education. Late at night, when the base settled into quiet routine and her security rounds took her through empty corridors, Sarah had used her access codes to review classified performance data. The F-20's specifications were impressive on paper, but the real revelation had come from pilot reports filed during the aircraft's brief testing period. Every pilot who had flown the prototype had praised its responsiveness, its intuitive controls, its ability to perform maneuvers that pushed the boundaries of aerodynamic possibility. Most significantly, the F-20 had been designed for precisely the kind of demonstration flying that defined airshows. Its systems could handle extreme G-forces. Its engine could operate efficiently at both high and low altitudes, and its flight envelope included capabilities that would make it competitive with any aircraft scheduled to appear at Thunder Bay. Sarah pulled the tarp completely away from the cockpit, folding it carefully and setting it aside. The canopy was pristine, its transparency unmarred by the scratches and wear marks that accumulated on operational aircraft. She could see into the cockpit, where analog gauges mixed with early digital displays in a configuration that represented the evolutionary bridge between mechanical and computerized flight systems. Her reflection stared back at her from the curved glass, a woman in her early 30s with short brown hair and eyes that held the focused intensity of someone who had learned to trust only her own judgment. The uniform she wore was different. Now security patches replacing the pilot's wings that had once marked her as a member of the Air Force's elite. But the knowledge remained, the skills honed through years of training and experience that no administrative decision could erase. Outside, the practice session continued. Radio chatter filtered through the hangar's communication speakers, pilots coordinating movements and calling out positions in the clipped professional language that Sarah still spoke fluently. She listened to the familiar rhythm of tactical communication, hearing the slight hesitation in Captain Webb's voice as he struggled with a maneuver sequence that she had mastered months earlier. The Thunder Bay Airshow was 5 days away. In 5 days, her former squadron would perform before an audience that included defense contractors, foreign military attaches, and members of Congress who controlled budgets that shaped the future of American aviation. The performance would be flawless, the result of her planning and their execution. A collaboration that had been severed by politics, but whose effects would endure. Sarah walked around the F-20, examining every panel, every access port, every system interface. The aircraft was more than flight-ready, it was perfect, maintained to standards that exceeded those applied to operational fighters. Someone had invested considerable resources in preserving this prototype, ensuring that it remained capable of demonstrating the capabilities that had made it legendary among test pilots. As the sun climbed higher above the Nevada desert, casting harsh shadows through the hangar's skylights, Sarah completed her morning security check. Her signature went onto the log sheet, documenting another routine inspection of aircraft that the world had forgotten. But routine was an illusion, and forgetting was a mistake that some people were about to regret very deeply. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The maintenance bay adjoining Hangar 7 had become Sarah's unofficial office, a cramped space filled with diagnostic equipment and reference manuals that most security personnel would never need. But Sarah wasn't most security personnel. Her MIT engineering degree and test pilot certification had taught her to read aircraft systems like others read novels, finding stories in hydraulic pressure, readings and fuel flow patterns that revealed an aircraft's true condition. At 0630 hours, she sat hunched over a laptop displaying the F-20's maintenance logs, cross-referencing system checks with performance specifications that she had memorized during her graduate studies. The coffee beside her had grown cold hours ago, but she barely noticed. Something in the data patterns bothered her, a subtle inconsistency that most technicians would dismiss as normal variance, but that her trained eye recognized as potentially significant. The door to the bay opened with a metallic scrape, and technical Sergeant James Rodriguez entered, carrying a toolbox and wearing the resigned expression of someone assigned to work in the forgotten corners of the base. Rodriguez was one of the few personnel who still treated Sarah with the respect due to her rank rather than the dismissive politeness reserved for security guards. He had worked on her F-16 before her reassignment and understood exactly what the Air Force had lost when they grounded one of their most capable pilots. "Morning, Captain," Rodriguez said, setting his toolbox on the workbench. "Heard they've got you babysitting the museum pieces now." Sarah looked up from her laptop, noting the careful way Rodriguez avoided mentioning her demotion directly. "Something like that, Sergeant. Actually, I wanted to ask you about these maintenance records for the Tiger Shark." Rodriguez moved closer, his expression shifting from casual conversation to professional interest. As one of the base's senior avionics specialists, he understood aircraft systems with the intuitive knowledge that came from 20 years of troubleshooting complex problems. "What kind of irregularities are you seeing?" Sarah turned the laptop screen toward him, pointing to a series of fuel system readings that had been logged over the past month. "Look at these pressure differentials. The variance is within acceptable parameters, but there's a pattern here that doesn't match normal system behavior." Rodriguez studied the data, his eyes narrowing as he processed the information. The numbers showed subtle fluctuations in fuel delivery pressure, variations so small that they fell well within normal operational ranges, but that followed a pattern suggesting systematic rather than random variation. "You're thinking someone's been tampering with the fuel management system." "I'm thinking someone's been very careful about tampering with the fuel management system," Sarah corrected. "These readings suggest micro-adjustments to fuel flow rates, changes small enough to avoid detection during routine inspections, but significant enough to affect engine performance under stress conditions. The implications hung between them like a challenge to everything they thought they knew about base security." The F-20 was supposed to be a static display, an aircraft maintained for historical preservation rather than operational readiness. Any modifications to its systems would require authorization from multiple levels of command, documentation that should have been obvious in the maintenance logs. Rodriguez pulled up a chair and began examining the data more closely, his fingers moving across the keyboard as he accessed deeper layers of system information. If someone wanted to sabotage this bird without getting caught, fuel system modification would be the way to do it. Subtle enough to pass inspection, but potentially catastrophic if the aircraft was pushed to performance limits. "Exactly," Sarah sighed. "And the timing of these modifications correlates with something else interesting." She opened a second window on the laptop, displaying personnel access logs for Hangar 7. 3 people have had regular access to this aircraft over the past month. Me, you, and Staff Sergeant Kevin Chun from the Exhibition Maintenance Team. The name hung in the air like an accusation. Chun was a competent technician with 8 years of service and a clean record, but he was also one of the few personnel who had expressed open resentment about being assigned to museum duty instead of working on operational aircraft. More significantly, Chun had submitted 2 requests for transfer to the Thunderhawk Squadron, both of which had been denied due to staffing requirements. Rodriguez frowned, his professional instincts conflicting with his reluctance to suspect a fellow technician. Chun knows these systems well enough to make the kind of modifications you're describing. But why would he sabotage an aircraft that's not even supposed to fly? Sarah closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair, her mind working through possibilities that ranged from simple vandalism to more complex conspiracies. Maybe he knows something we don't. Maybe someone told him this aircraft might fly again. The suggestion carried implications that neither of them wanted to voice directly. If the F-20 was being prepared for flight, it meant someone with significant authority was planning something beyond routine museum operations. And if that same someone wanted the aircraft to fail catastrophically, it suggested a level of corruption or sabotage that reached far beyond the actions of a disgruntled technician. Outside the maintenance bay, the sound of jet engines grew louder as the morning training session began. Through the small window, Sarah could see F-16 axing toward the runway, their pilots invisible behind dark canopies, but their radio chatter audible through the base communication system. Captain Webb's voice cut through the static, calling out formation positions with the mechanical precision of someone following a script, rather than leading through instinct. "The thing is," Rodriguez said slowly, "Chun's been asking a lot of questions about the Tiger Shark lately. Specific questions about flight systems, engine parameters, the kind of technical details you'd need if you were planning to actually fly." The thing. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning desert air. What kind of questions? Fuel consumption rates at various altitudes, G-force limitations for the airframe, maximum sustained turn rates, the kind of performance, data you'd need for aerobatic demonstration flying. Rodriguez paused, his expression darkening. The kind of data you'd need for airshow competition. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. The Thunder Bay Air Show wasn't just a demonstration of American air power, it was a competition with significant financial and political stakes for the winning participants. Defense contractors used airshow performances to showcase their products to international buyers. Military careers were made or broken based on the success of high-profile demonstrations. And the F-20 Tiger Shark, despite being officially retired, represented technology that could embarrass the more expensive aircraft currently in service. "Someone's planning to fly the Tiger Shark at Thunder Bay," Sarah said, the certainty crystallizing in her mind. "And someone else wants to make sure it doesn't succeed." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "The question is, who's the pilot? This bird requires someone with test pilot experience, someone who understands experimental aircraft systems. There aren't many people with those qualifications who would risk their career on an unauthorized flight." Sarah stood and walked to the window, watching as her former squadron completed their takeoff sequence and climbed into the clear Nevada sky. The irony was almost overwhelming. She was probably the only pilot on the base, qualified to safely fly the F-20, yet she was also the person most likely to be blamed if anything went wrong with the aircraft under her guard. "There's something else," Rodriguez continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I heard from a buddy in scheduling that there's been some unusual activity around the flight roster for Thunder Bay, last-minute changes, unofficial additions to the demonstration lineup. Someone with serious pull has been making modifications to the show program." The implication sent a surge of adrenaline through Sarah's system. If powerful figures were involved in whatever conspiracy surrounded the F-20, her investigation could be more dangerous than simple maintenance irregularities. Military politics at the highest levels involved careers, contracts, and classified information that some people would kill to protect. But Sarah had already lost everything that mattered to her professionally. Her flight status was gone, her squadron assignment terminated, her future in the Air Force reduced to counting inventory in forgotten hangars. She had reached the point where having nothing left to lose became a form of freedom, a liberation from the careful political calculations that constrained more cautious individuals. "I need to examine that aircraft more closely," she said, turning back to Rodriguez. "Tonight, after the base settles down, if someone's been modifying the fuel system, there will be physical evidence that goes beyond computer logs." Rodriguez hesitated, understanding the risks involved in unauthorized aircraft inspection. "Captain, if you're caught tampering with museum property, it'll be more than reassignment. Court-martial, possible criminal charges. And if someone's planning to use a sabotaged aircraft in a demonstration that could kill the pilot and spectators, what then?" Sarah's voice carried the edge of command authority that had made her an effective squadron leader. "I've spent 3 months watching other people fly missions I should be leading. I'm not going to spend the rest of my career wondering if I could have prevented a disaster." The afternoon stretched ahead with the weight of decisions that would define not just Sarah's future, but potentially the lives of everyone connected to the Thunder Bay Air Show somewhere in the complex web of military politics and personal ambition, someone was planning an action that required the F-20 Tiger Shark to fail publicly and catastrophically. Sarah's job was supposed to be simple: guard the hangar, log the inspections, stay invisible until the Air Force decided what to do with a pilot who had committed the unforgivable sin of being right at an inconvenient time. But simple jobs had a way of becoming complicated when they intersected with conspiracy, sabotage, and the kind of high-stakes competition that turned air shows into battlegrounds for national prestige. As the sun climbed toward its zenith above the desert, casting sharp shadows across the tarmac where her former squadron continued their practice routines, Sarah began planning an investigation that would either clear her name or destroy what remained of her military career. The F-20 Tiger Shark sat in its hangar like a sleeping predator, beautiful and deadly, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to wake it up. The choice was no longer whether to act, but how quickly she could uncover the truth before someone else's agenda turned speculation into tragedy. The base transformed after midnight, its daytime chaos replaced by the skeletal crew that maintained essential operations through the quiet hours. Security patrols followed predictable routes, their flashlight beams cutting geometric patterns through the darkness as they checked perimeters and locked facilities. Sarah had memorized these patterns during her months of exile, learning the rhythm of night security with the same methodical precision she had once applied to combat tactics. At 0200 hours, she slipped through the maintenance bay entrance using her security code, the electronic lock disengaging with a soft click that seemed thunderous in the desert silence. The hangar beyond lay in darkness, broken only by emergency lighting that cast pools of red illumination across the concrete floor. The covered aircraft sat like sleeping giants, their forms suggesting power held in suspension. Sarah moved without using additional light, her memory guiding her between the safety barriers toward the F-20 Tiger Shark. 3 months of walking. These same paths had given her an intimate knowledge of every obstacle, every tool cart, every irregularity in the floor surface. Her boots made no sound against the concrete, the soft-soled security shoes proving unexpectedly useful for covert operations. The F-20 waited beneath its gray tarp, unchanged since her afternoon inspection, but somehow more ominous in the darkness. Sarah pulled a small LED penlight from her pocket, its beam narrow enough to avoid detection from the hangar's perimeter windows. The aircraft's access panels were secured with standard military fasteners, combinations that she knew by heart from her years, maintaining her own F-16. Working methodically, she removed the lower fuselage panel that provided access to the fuel management system. The components inside were exactly as specified in the technical manuals she had studied, but her trained eye immediately spotted irregularities that confirmed her suspicions. Several fuel lines showed evidence of recent disconnection and reconnection, with fresh tool marks on the fittings that contrasted sharply with the aged patina of undisturbed components. More significantly, she discovered a small electronic device attached to the main fuel control valve, a component roughly the size of a cigarette pack with wiring that had been carefully integrated into the existing system. The device bore no military markings or identification numbers, suggesting aftermarket modification rather than authorized upgrade. Sarah photographed it with her phone, the flash disabled to maintain operational security. Her examination was interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing from the main hangar entrance. Sarah immediately extinguished her light and pressed herself against the aircraft's landing gear, listening as someone entered the space with the confident movement of authorized personnel. The footsteps were measured, deliberate, belonging to someone familiar with the hangar layout. Through the gap beneath the aircraft's fuselage, Sarah could see a figure moving between the static displays with a purpose that had nothing to do with routine security patrol. The person carried a small toolkit and moved directly toward the rear of the hangar where the Korean War-era F-86 Sabre sat behind velvet ropes. The figure's movements were too assured, too specific to represent casual inspection. Sarah remained motionless as the unknown visitor began working on the F-86's engine compartment, the soft sounds of tool against metal carrying clearly through the still air. Whoever this was possessed both technical knowledge and official access, since no alarms had triggered when they entered the facility. The realization that she was witnessing another phase of the conspiracy sent adrenaline coursing through her. After 20 minutes, the figure completed their work and moved toward the hangar exit, pausing briefly near the F-20's position before continuing toward the door. Sarah caught a glimpse of the person's profile in the emergency lighting staff. Sergeant Kevin Chun, exactly as she had suspected. But Chun's presence raised new questions about the scope and purpose of the sabotage operation. Once certain that Chun had departed, Sarah emerged from concealment and approached the F-86 Sabre. The aircraft's engine access panel hung slightly ajar, and her examination revealed modifications similar to those she had discovered on the F-20, another unauthorized electronic device. More fresh tool marks, evidence of systematic tampering with fuel delivery systems. The pattern was becoming clear, but its implications were staggering. Someone was sabotaging multiple aircraft in the museum collection, not randomly but according to a specific selection criterion. Both the F-20 and F-86 were single-engine fighters with exceptional performance characteristics, aircraft that could theoretically be returned to flight status with relatively minor restoration work. Sarah's phone vibrated with an incoming text. Message, the screen's glow seeming blindingly bright in the darkness. The message was from Rodriguez, emergency meeting. Maintenance bay, now. She found the sergeant waiting in the bay with coffee, an expression of barely controlled urgency. Rodriguez had clearly been working through the night, his uniform wrinkled, his eyes showing the strain of someone processing disturbing information. I did some digging into those access logs you showed me. Rodriguez began without preamble. Chun's been busy, but he's not working alone. Someone with administrator privileges has been modifying maintenance records, backdating entries to make the sabotage look like routine service. Sarah accepted the coffee and settled into a chair, her mind racing through the implications. Administrative access to maintenance records required authority well above Chin's pay grade, suggesting involvement from officer-level personnel with significant computer privileges. There's more, Rodriguez continued. I contacted a friend at Nellis who handles airshow coordination. The Thunder Bay demonstration roster has been modified 3 times in the past week. Unofficial aircraft have been added to the program, including 2 heritage flights that weren't part of the original schedule. Heritage flights featuring museum aircraft that are supposed to be permanently grounded, Sarah said, understanding immediately. Exactly. Someone's planning to fly birds from our collection, which means they need pilots qualified on vintage aircraft systems, and they need those aircraft to fail in very specific ways. Rodriguez pulled up a file on his laptop, displaying technical specifications for the devices Sarah had discovered. These modifications don't just sabotage fuel delivery, they're designed to cause progressive failure under high-stress conditions. The picture was becoming horrifyingly clear. The sabotage wasn't intended to prevent the aircraft from flying, but to ensure they would fail catastrophically during demonstration, likely during high-G maneuvers or aerobatic sequences that would be impossible to survive. The goal wasn't just to embarrass rival aircraft manufacturers, but to eliminate pilots who pose some kind of threat to the conspirators. Who has the authority to modify airshow rosters? Sarah asked. Limited list. Base commanders, show coordinators, and certain Pentagon liaisons who handle international demonstration programs. Rodriguez paused, his expression grim. But there's one name that keeps appearing in the authorization chains. Colonel Bradley Harrison. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Colonel Harrison had presided over her demotion hearing, had signed the orders transferring her to security duty, had consistently blocked her attempts to appeal the decision. If Harrison was involved in the conspiracy, her reassignment hadn't been punishment for excessive caution. It had been strategic positioning to place her where she could be blamed for security failures. Think about it, Rodriguez continued. You're the only pilot on this base qualified to fly the F-20. If someone wanted to eliminate you while making it look like an accident, what better way than to sabotage an aircraft and then arrange for you to be the pilot? The logic was inescapable and terrifying. Sarah's expertise with experimental aircraft made her both the ideal pilot for the F-20 and the perfect target for assassination, disguised as mechanical failure. Her current assignment as hangar security provided plausible reason for her to have access to the aircraft, while her disciplinary record would explain any irregularities in pre-flight procedures. We need evidence, Sarah said, forcing her voice to remain steady despite the implications. Something that directly links Harrison to the sabotage operation. Already working on it. Rodriguez turned his laptop screen toward her, displaying a series of email headers recovered from the base communication server. These messages were sent from Harrison's account to external addresses, including several defense contractors who have competing aircraft in the Thunder Bay demonstration. The email timestamps correlated perfectly with the sabotage activities, creating a paper trail that connected Colonel Harrison to both the modification of demonstration rosters and the systematic compromise of museum aircraft. But the evidence also revealed the scope of the conspiracy extended beyond simple murder. This was industrial espionage designed to influence defense contracts worth billions of dollars. There's a problem with going to authorities, Rodriguez warned. Harrison has allies throughout the command structure. Anyone we report to might be compromised, and if they're not, Harrison will know we're investigating him. Sarah stared at the evidence displayed on the laptop screen, understanding that she faced a choice between personal survival and professional duty. She could disappear, request immediate transfer, find ways to avoid becoming Harrison's target. Or she could use her unique position to expose the conspiracy, knowing that doing so would make her an even more attractive target for elimination. The sound of jet engines began building in the distance as the pre-dawn training flights prepared for departure. In a few hours, the base would return to its normal rhythm of activity, providing cover for both conspirators and investigators. But the window for action was narrowing rapidly as the Thunder Bay Air Show approached. How long do we have? Sarah asked. 3 days until the first Heritage aircraft is scheduled to fly. Based on the modification patterns, I'd guess they're planning to activate the sabotage devices during the demonstration flights. Rodriguez closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. After that, it becomes a question of how many pilots they're willing to kill to achieve their objectives. Sarah stood and walked to the bay's small window, watching as the eastern horizon began to show the first hints of dawn. Somewhere in the complex hierarchy of military politics and defense contracting, powerful people had decided that murder was an acceptable tool for achieving their goals. They had chosen her as both weapon and victim, counting on her professional competence to make their plan succeed and her current vulnerability to prevent effective resistance. But they had made a critical error in their calculations. They had underestimated what happened when a highly trained pilot had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The Thunder Bay Air Show Media Center buzzed with controlled chaos as journalists, photographers, and military public relations officers prepared for the most prestigious aviation event on the West Coast. Sarah observed the activity from the edge of the parking area, her security badge providing access to areas where most personnel would be questioned and turned away. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her demotion to security duty had inadvertently given her the perfect cover for investigating a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military command. She had spent the morning documenting everything Rodriguez had discovered, creating encrypted backups of evidence that she stored on secure servers, beyond the reach of base administrators. The email trails, maintenance records, and photographic evidence of sabotaged devices created a compelling case. But building a case and surviving to present it were entirely different challenges. At the media center, Sarah positioned herself near the demonstration flight announcement board, where updates to the airshow roster appeared throughout the day. As Rodriguez had predicted, 2 heritage flights had been added to the program within the past 48 hours. The F-20 Tiger Shark was now scheduled for a solo aerobatic demonstration, while the F-86 Sabre would participate in a formation flight with active duty F-16s from the Thunderhawk squadron. The timing was perfect from the conspirators' perspective. Both sabotaged aircraft would fail during high-visibility demonstrations, creating maximum impact for their intended message, while eliminating the pilot most likely to expose their operation. Sarah's name didn't appear on any official pilot roster, but she knew that would change soon enough. Captain Mitchell? The voice behind her carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. Sarah turned to face Colonel Bradley Harrison, whose presence seemed to drain energy from the surrounding activity. Harrison was a tall man with graying hair and eyes that revealed nothing of his thoughts or intentions. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his bearing that of an officer who had never doubted his own righteousness. "Colonel," Sarah replied, maintaining military courtesy despite her knowledge of his role in the conspiracy. "I need to speak with you privately. There's been a development regarding your current assignment." Harrison gestured toward a conference room that had been set aside for official business during the airshow preparation. The room's isolation from the main media area would provide perfect privacy for whatever Harrison had planned. Sarah followed him into the conference room, noting the presence of 2 other figures she didn't recognize. One was a civilian in expensive suit whose bearing suggested either high-level government or defense contractor status. The other was a military officer wearing the insignia of an Air Force colonel, but from a unit Sarah couldn't immediately identify. "Captain Mitchell," Harrison began once the door was closed, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Marcus Webb from Lockheed Martin's Advanced Systems Division, and Colonel Patricia Santos from Pentagon Acquisition Oversight. They're here to discuss a unique opportunity that's developed for the Thunder Bay demonstration." The name Webb triggered immediate recognition. This was the civilian brother of Captain Marcus Webb, her replacement as Thunderhawk squadron leader. The family connection explained much about the younger Webb's rapid promotion and the political protection that had enabled his assignment to such a prestigious position. "Dr. Webb has been reviewing our heritage aircraft collection," Harrison continued, "and believes the F-20 Tiger Shark represents an exceptional opportunity to demonstrate historical aviation capabilities to our international guests. The aircraft's unique design characteristics make it ideal for aerobatic demonstration that would showcase American engineering innovation." Sarah kept her expression neutral while processing the implications. The setup was more sophisticated than she had anticipated, involving not just military corruption but civilian defense contractors with billions of dollars at stake in international arms sales. The F-20's demonstration would serve multiple purposes, eliminating her while discrediting competing aircraft designs that threatened established business relationships. "The challenge," Dr. Webb said, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone delivering a prepared presentation, "is finding a pilot qualified to safely demonstrate such a unique aircraft. The F-20 systems are substantially different from modern fighters, requiring someone with both test pilot experience and familiarity with experimental aircraft design." Colonel Santos leaned forward, her expression suggesting reluctant agreement with a distasteful but necessary decision. "Captain Mitchell, despite the circumstances that led to your current assignment, your technical background and flight experience make you uniquely qualified for this demonstration. The Pentagon has authorized a temporary restoration of your flight status for this specific mission." The offer was presented as an honor, a chance for redemption and return to the cockpit that had been her life's passion. But Sarah understood. It as something far more sinister, a carefully constructed execution disguised as opportunity. They were counting on her desire to fly again, her professional pride, and her emotional attachment to prove herself worthy of the trust they were pretending to restore. What would the demonstration entail? Sarah asked, playing her role as the grateful officer being offered a second chance. Harrison spread a flight plan across the conference table, his finger tracing a route that would take the F-20 through a series of increasingly demanding maneuvers. The sequence begins with basic aerobatic demonstrations, barrel rolls, loops, high G turns. Then we progress to more advanced maneuvers that showcase the aircraft's unique capabilities. The climax would be a simulated combat demonstration, pushing the aircraft to its performance limits. Sarah studied the flight plan with growing certainty that it had been designed specifically to trigger the sabotage devices at maximum altitude and speed, ensuring that any failure would be both spectacular and unsurvivable. The final maneuver called for a near-vertical climb followed by a high-speed dive, exactly the kind of stress profile that would activate progressive fuel system failure. When would this demonstration take place? She asked. Tomorrow afternoon, Dr. Webb replied. The international audience includes defense ministers from allied nations and representatives from competing aircraft manufacturers. A successful demonstration could influence procurement decisions worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The timeline confirmed Sarah's suspicions about the conspiracy's urgency. Tomorrow's demonstration would occur during peak media coverage with maximum visibility for both the aircraft's apparent capabilities and its dramatic failure. The deaths of both pilot and spectators would create an international incident that could reshape defense procurement for decades. I appreciate the opportunity, Sarah said carefully, but I'll need time to familiarize myself with the F-20's specific systems. It's been several years since I've flown anything similar. Colonel Santos nodded approvingly. Of course. We've arranged for you to have exclusive access to the aircraft for the remainder of today and tonight. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez will provide maintenance support, and all necessary documentation has been cleared for your review. The mention of Rodriguez sent a chill through Sarah's system. Either the conspirators didn't know about his investigation, or they were planning to eliminate him as well. The inclusion of her ally in the operational plan suggested that the conspiracy was more comprehensive than she had realized, with contingencies for multiple threats to their objectives. There is one additional consideration, Harrison said, his tone becoming more formal. Given the experimental nature of this aircraft and the high-profile nature of the demonstration, all pre-flight preparations will be conducted under enhanced security protocols. No unauthorized personnel will have access to the aircraft, and all maintenance activities will be documented and supervised. Sarah understood the real message. She would have no opportunity to discover or disable the sabotage devices before flight. Her investigation had been detected, and the conspirators were now implementing countermeasures to ensure their plan's success. The enhanced security wasn't protection for the aircraft, but protection for the sabotage. Dr. Webb, Sarah said, addressing the civilian directly, what specific performance parameters are you hoping to demonstrate? I want to ensure the flight profile maximizes the aircraft's capabilities. Webb smiled with the confidence of someone whose plan was proceeding exactly as intended. Push it to the absolute limits, Captain. Our international guests need to see what American engineering can achieve when unconstrained by conservative operational protocols. Show them something they'll never forget. The phrase carried unmistakable menace disguised as encouragement. Webb wasn't just asking for an aggressive demonstration. He was explicitly requesting the kind of extreme flying that would guarantee the sabotage devices would activate at the worst possible moment. As the meeting concluded and the participants began to disperse, Sarah found herself committed to a flight that she knew was designed to kill her. The F-20 Tiger Shark would fly tomorrow afternoon, carrying both her dreams of redemption and the certainty of her destruction. Unless she could find a way to turn the conspirators' plan against them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the air show grounds as Sarah walked back toward Hangar 7, her mind racing through possibilities that seemed to decrease with each passing hour. The conspiracy had anticipated her investigation, neutralized her allies, and created operational conditions that eliminated most of her options for survival. But they had also made one critical error. They had given her exactly what she had been. Denied for 3 months access to the most advanced fighter aircraft in the museum collection, with official authorization to push it beyond all reasonable limits. The F-20 Tiger Shark was designed to be superior to every other aircraft that would participate in the Thunder Bay Air Show. If Sarah could find a way to neutralize the sabotage without alerting the conspirators, she would have in her hands a weapon capable of exposing their entire operation in the most public forum imaginable. The aircraft they intended to use for her execution could become the instrument of their destruction. The question was no longer whether she would fly the F-20 tomorrow. The question was whether she would live long enough to land it. Sarah spent the evening in Hangar 7 under the watchful supervision of 2 security specialists who had been assigned to monitor her aircraft preparation. The guards maintained professional distance while ensuring that every tool, every manual, and every component she accessed was documented according to the enhanced protocols Colonel Harrison had mandated. They believed they were protecting valuable military assets from tampering. In reality, they were unwitting accomplices in ensuring her execution proceeded without interference. But Sarah's years as a test pilot had taught her to think beyond obvious solutions. While the guards monitored her official activities, she used her authorized access to study systems that appeared unrelated to flight operations, but that could prove crucial to survival. The F-20's design included redundancies and manual overrides that the saboteurs had likely overlooked, features built into experimental aircraft to allow test pilots to maintain control even when primary systems failed catastrophically. Working methodically through the aircraft's technical documentation, Sarah identified 3 critical backup systems that operated independently of the compromised fuel management network. The first was a manual fuel bypass valve that could redirect flow around electronic controls, operated by a lever hidden beneath the pilot's seat that most pilots never needed to locate. The second was an emergency power unit that could maintain hydraulic pressure even if the main engine lost fuel pressure. The third was a manual flight control mode that bypassed all electronic assistance, returning the aircraft to pure mechanical linkage between pilot, input, and control surface movement. None of these systems would prevent the sabotage devices from activating, but they could keep the aircraft controllable long enough for her to complete a demonstration that would expose the conspiracy rather than conceal it. The key was timing. She needed to allow the sabotage to begin so that electronic monitoring would record the failure, but intervene quickly enough to prevent the aircraft from becoming unrecoverable. Rodriguez arrived at 2,100 hours carrying a toolkit and wearing the expression of someone who understood exactly how dangerous the situation had become. The security guards allowed him access to the aircraft, but monitored his every movement, their presence ensuring that any conversation between him and Sarah would be overheard and recorded. All systems check out according to standard parameters. Rodriguez announced loudly enough for the guards to hear clearly. Engine compression is within specifications, hydraulic pressure is nominal, and electrical systems are functioning normally. But as he worked, Rodriguez used a combination of hand signals and written notes to communicate information that the guards couldn't detect. The sabotage devices were still active and had been modified with additional components during the afternoon, suggesting that the conspirators were taking no chances with the reliability of their assassination method. More ominously, Rodriguez had discovered evidence that similar devices had been installed on the F-86 Sabre, confirming that multiple pilots were targeted for elimination. Sarah acknowledged his warnings, while maintaining the appearance of routine pre-flight preparation. Her hands moved across the aircraft's control surfaces with the practiced efficiency of someone conducting standard inspections, but her eyes were memorizing the exact locations of manual overrides and emergency systems that might mean the difference between controlled flight and catastrophic failure. At 2,300 hours, the guards rotated shifts, providing a brief window during which the new personnel were settling into their monitoring routine. Sarah used those precious minutes to make physical modifications that wouldn't be detected by casual inspection, but that could prove crucial during flight. She loosened the safety wire on the manual fuel bypass valve, making it accessible with a simple twist rather than requiring tools. She adjusted the seat positioning to ensure her right hand could reach the emergency power unit controls without removing her left hand from the flight stick. Most importantly, she disabled the electronic locks on the manual flight control system, allowing instant transition to mechanical backup if the primary controls were compromised. The modifications were subtle but significant, turning the F-20 from a flying coffin into a weapon she could use against the people who had tried to kill her. If the sabotage activated as planned, she would have approximately 30 seconds of confusion during which electronic monitoring would record system failures, while she maintained actual control of the aircraft. Those 30 seconds would be her opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that would expose the entire conspiracy. Rodriguez completed his inspection and departed with a brief nod that conveyed both understanding and farewell. Sarah knew she might not see him again if the conspiracy was as comprehensive as she suspected. Anyone who had helped her investigation would face consequences that extended far beyond simple reassignment. The night passed slowly as Sarah reviewed flight plans and mentally rehearsed emergency procedures that weren't taught in any manual. The guards maintained their vigil, documenting her every action while remaining unaware that they were witnessing preparation for the most complex aerial demonstration in airshow history. She appeared to be a nervous pilot preparing for her chance at redemption. In reality, she was a weapon preparing to turn the conspirators' plan into their destruction. Dawn broke clear and bright across the Nevada desert, with visibility unlimited and wind conditions perfect for aerobatic demonstration. The Thunder Bay Airshow Media Complex came alive with international journalists, military officials, and defense contractor representatives who had traveled from around the world to witness America's aviation capabilities. None of them suspected that they were about to see a performance that would reshape their understanding of both aircraft technology and military corruption. Sarah arrived at the aircraft at 0800 hours, dressed in a flight suit that felt like coming home after months of wearing security uniforms. The F-20 had been moved overnight to a position near the runway, surrounded by media equipment and VIP viewing areas that would provide optimal visibility for her demonstration. The setup was perfect for the conspirators' purposes: maximum audience, optimal camera angles, and positioning that would ensure any aircraft failure would be captured from multiple angles. Colonel Harrison approached as she began her external pre-flight inspection, his presence drawing the attention of nearby media representatives who recognized the significance of a senior officer personally overseeing the demonstration. His expression conveyed confident pride in American aviation technology, but Sarah could see the anticipation in his eyes as he calculated the timing of her approaching execution. "Beautiful morning for flying, Captain," Harrison said, his voice carrying easily to the surrounding microphones. "I trust you're ready to show our international guests what American engineering can accomplish." "Absolutely, sir," Sarah replied, matching his public enthusiasm while noting the positioning of nearby emergency crews. The F-20 represents the pinnacle of 1980s fighter design. I'm honored to demonstrate its capabilities. Dr. Webb materialized beside them, flanked by a group of foreign military officials whose uniforms indicated high-ranking positions in their respective air forces. Webb's satisfaction was barely concealed as he explained the significance of the approaching demonstration to officials who would influence billion-dollar procurement decisions based on what they witnessed. "Captain Mitchell," Webb said, gesturing toward the international audience, "these gentlemen represent air forces that are currently evaluating fighter aircraft for modernization programs. Your demonstration today could influence their decisions for decades to come." The pressure was perfect from the conspiracy's perspective. Sarah was being asked to perform not just for media attention, but for an audience whose reactions would determine international military relationships and defense industry profits. Her failure would discredit not just the F-20, but American aviation technology in general, opening markets for competitors who had invested heavily in Harrison's cooperation. As Sarah completed her external inspection, she noted the presence of Technical Sergeant Chun among the maintenance personnel who were providing final preparation support. Chun's nervous energy was obvious to anyone who knew what to look for, but the surrounding officials interpreted his behavior as normal pre-flight anxiety rather than guilt about pending murder. The moment of truth was approaching rapidly. In 30 minutes, Sarah would climb into the cockpit of an aircraft that had been carefully sabotaged to kill her at the worst possible moment. The international audience would witness what appeared to be a catastrophic failure of American aviation technology, while actually seeing the exposure of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military and corporate leadership. Sarah walked around the F-21 final time, her hand trailing along the fuselage in what appeared to be an emotional farewell to earthbound safety. In reality, she was making final verification that her emergency modifications remained undetected and functional. The manual controls were accessible, the backup systems were armed, and the aircraft was ready to become either her tomb or her weapon. The choice would be determined by her ability to survive the next hour. The F-20 Tiger Shark's engine roared to life with a sound that penetrated every corner of the Thunder Bay Airshow grounds, announcing the beginning of what thousands of spectators believed would be a routine heritage demonstration. Sarah felt the familiar vibration of a fighter aircraft awakening, the subtle tremor through the airframe that connected pilot to machine in ways that no civilian could understand. But this morning, that connection carried the weight of conspiracy, betrayal, and the certainty that the next 20 minutes would determine whether justice or corruption would prevail. The tower cleared her for takeoff with crisp professionalism, their voices betraying no awareness that they were authorizing what Colonel Harrison believed would be the final flight of Captain Sarah Mitchell. She advanced the throttle smoothly, feeling the F-20 surge forward with the eager responsiveness that had made it legendary among test pilots. The aircraft wanted to fly, its systems humming with mechanical perfection that masked the electronic poison hidden within its fuel management network. As the wheels left the runway, Sarah experienced the profound silence that followed takeoff, that moment when earthbound concerns fell away and only the sky remained. But today, the silence carried menace rather than freedom. Somewhere in the electronic systems beneath her seat, sophisticated sabotage devices were monitoring flight parameters, waiting for the precise combination of altitude, speed, and stress that would trigger catastrophic failure. The international audience watched from VIP viewing areas as the F-20 climbed into the crystalline Nevada sky, its silver fuselage catching the morning sunlight like a weapon forged from pure energy. Dr. Webb stood beside Colonel Harrison, both men checking their watches and calculating the timeline that would lead to Sarah's destruction. They appeared to be proud officers sharing a moment of technological triumph, but their eyes held the cold anticipation of executioners counting down to a predetermined death. Sarah began the demonstration sequence with basic aerobatic maneuvers, barrel rolls and loops that showcased the F-20's agility while allowing her to test the aircraft's responses under increasing G-forces. Every control input felt normal, the aircraft responding with the precise obedience that characterized well-maintained fighters. But she knew that normalcy was an illusion, that electronic monitoring systems were recording every parameter and waiting for the moment when her altitude and speed would match the saboteur's predetermined trigger conditions. The crowd below responded with enthusiasm as the F-20 traced graceful arcs across the sky, its engine note changing pitch as Sarah transitioned between maneuvers. News cameras followed her every movement, broadcasting the demonstration to audiences around the world who had no idea they were witnessing an assassination attempt disguised as patriotic celebration. Foreign military officials raised binoculars and telephoto lenses, documenting American aviation capabilities for intelligence reports that would influence their nation's defense planning. At 8,000 feet, Sarah felt the first subtle change in engine response, a slight hesitation that lasted barely half a second, but that her trained senses detected immediately. The sabotage devices had activated, beginning the progressive failure sequence that would appear to be mechanical malfunction rather than deliberate murder. She had perhaps 90 seconds before the fuel system degradation would become obvious to ground observers, and another 30 seconds beyond that before the aircraft would become unrecoverable. Instead of aborting the demonstration, Sarah pushed the F-20 into increasingly aggressive maneuvers, her hands dancing across controls with the fluid precision of someone who had spent thousands of hours perfecting the marriage of human intention and mechanical response. To the audience below, she appeared to be building toward the climactic finale that would showcase American engineering at its finest. In reality, she was buying time to gather evidence that would expose the conspiracy, while positioning herself for the performance that would turn their plan into their destruction. The second phase of failure manifested as fuel pressure fluctuations that would have been invisible to ground observers, but that triggered every alarm in Sarah's experienced consciousness. The sabotage was proceeding exactly as designed, creating progressive system degradation that would culminate in total engine failure during the demonstration's most demanding sequence. She reached beneath her seat with practiced movements, her fingers finding the manual fuel bypass valve that she had prepared the night before. The valve turned with resistance that suggested it had never been used since the aircraft's construction. But Sarah's modifications allowed her to activate the backup system without tools or extended manipulation. Fuel flow immediately stabilized as the manual bypass circumvented the compromised electronic controls, restoring engine performance to normal parameters. But the electronic monitoring systems continued to record failure indicators, creating the documentary evidence that would prove deliberate sabotage while her actual flight performance remained unaffected, with fuel flow secured through backup systems. Sarah began the vertical climb sequence that the original flight plan had designated as the moment of her death. The F-20 pointed its nose toward the zenith and climbed with breathtaking acceleration, its engine producing thrust that pressed her deep into the ejection seat. At 15,000 feet, she rolled inverted and began the high-speed dive that should have triggered total system failure, but instead became the platform for a demonstration that no one in the audience would ever forget. The aircraft screamed toward the earth at speeds that pushed the envelope of aerodynamic design, but Sarah maintained perfect control through manual systems that the saboteurs had never suspected existed. Instead of the catastrophic failure that Harrison and Webb anticipated, the crowd witnessed precision flying that redefined their understanding of what vintage aircraft could accomplish. The F-20 pulled out of its dive barely 1,000 feet above the runway, executing a recovery that generated G-forces sufficient to render most pilots unconscious, but that Sarah handled with the casual competence of someone operating well within her capabilities. But the real revelation came when she activated the aircraft's communication system and began broadcasting on frequencies that reached not just the airshow tower, but military installations and civilian aviation authorities throughout the region. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone delivering testimony that would reshape understanding of military corruption and defense industry manipulation. Thunder Bay Tower. This is Captain Sarah Mitchell in the F-20 Tiger Shark. Be advised that this aircraft has been deliberately sabotaged with intent to cause fatal failure during demonstration. I am currently operating on backup systems, while electronic monitoring continues to record false failure indicators. Request immediate security response to apprehend Colonel Bradley Harrison and Dr. Marcus Webb of Lockheed Martin for conspiracy to commit murder and defense contract fraud. The transmission reached thousands of receivers simultaneously, creating a permanent record that could not be suppressed or classified by the conspirators. News organizations recorded her words, foreign intelligence services documented her accusations, and civilian aviation authorities initiated emergency protocols that would preserve evidence and protect witnesses. In 30 seconds of radio transmission, Sarah had transformed a carefully planned execution into an international incident that would expose corruption reaching the highest levels of military and corporate leadership. Colonel Harrison's face went ashen as he realized that his carefully constructed plan had been turned against him, that the pilot he had tried to eliminate had instead become the witness who would destroy his career and his freedom. Dr. Webb began backing away from the VIP viewing area, his survival instincts finally recognizing that his proximity to Harrison had become legally toxic. But their options for escape were evaporating as rapidly as their conspiracy was being exposed. Sarah brought the F-20 around for a second pass, this time flying directly over the viewing areas where Harrison and Webb stood frozen in the spotlight of international attention. The aircraft's engine sang with perfect health, its performance capabilities unmarred by sabotage that had been neutralized through preparation and skill that the conspirators had fatally underestimated. She rolled the fighter inverted as she passed overhead, a gesture that could be interpreted as aerobatic flourish, but that she intended as a salute to everyone who had been underestimated, overlooked, or discarded by systems that valued politics over competence. The demonstration that was supposed to end her life had instead become her vindication. Proof that excellence could triumph over corruption when courage was combined with preparation and the willingness to risk everything for truth. The F-20 Tiger Shark touched down on Thunder Bay's main runway with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, its tires kissing asphalt in a landing so smooth it seemed to mock the catastrophic crash that was supposed to have scattered wreckage across the desert floor. Sarah taxied toward the maintenance area where emergency vehicles had already positioned themselves, their crews uncertain whether they were responding to a crisis or witnessing the aftermath of the most extraordinary aviation demonstration in air show history. As the engine wound down from its operational roar to a whisper, Sarah could see through the canopy that the atmosphere on the ground had transformed completely. What had begun as a celebratory international showcase had become a crime scene, with military police vehicles surrounding the VIP viewing areas and federal agents materializing from positions they had apparently occupied throughout the morning. The conspiracy that Harrison and Webb had believed was perfectly concealed had been under surveillance by investigators whose patience and preparation rivaled Sarah's own. FBI Special Agent Diana Foster approached the aircraft as Sarah completed her shutdown procedures, her credentials visible and her expression carrying the satisfaction of someone whose long investigation had finally reached its conclusion. Foster had been tracking defense contractor irregularities for 18 months, following financial trails and communication patterns that suggested systematic corruption within military procurement systems. Sarah's radio transmission had provided the final piece of evidence needed to justify arrests that would reshape the defense industry's relationship with military leadership. "Captain Mitchell," Foster called as Sarah descended from the cockpit, her flight suit dark with perspiration, but her bearing steady as granite. We need to debrief you immediately, but first I want to thank you for providing evidence that validates everything our investigation has suggested. Sarah removed her helmet and accepted the bottle of water that Rodriguez offered, his presence among the emergency responders indicating that his role in exposing the conspiracy had been more significant than she had realized. His relieved smile suggested that he too had been under federal protection during the final phases of the investigation. His cooperation with Sarah, part of a larger operation designed to gather evidence against corruption that extended far beyond Falcon Ridge Air Base. How long have you known? Sarah asked Foster, her voice steady despite the adrenaline that continued coursing through her system. We've suspected Harrison for 6 months, but we needed evidence of active conspiracy rather than just financial irregularities. Your investigation provided the operational details that allowed us to document criminal intent. Foster gestured toward the VIP area where Harrison was being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. Dr. Webb and his Lockheed Martin associates have been under surveillance since February. Your demonstration today triggered a coordinated arrest operation that spans 3 states and involves multiple defense contractors. The scope of the investigation was staggering, involving not just the Thunder Bay sabotage, but a network of corruption that had influenced defense contracts worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Harrison's conspiracy was merely one component of a larger system designed to eliminate competition, suppress technological innovation, and ensure that established defense contractors maintained their market dominance regardless of performance or cost considerations. As federal agents processed the crime scene, international observers found themselves witnessing something unprecedented in aviation history: the exposure of high-level corruption during what was supposed to be a demonstration of American military excellence. Foreign defense ministers, who had arrived expecting to evaluate aircraft performance instead, documented evidence of conspiracy that would influence diplomatic relationships for decades. The irony was perfect. An event designed to showcase American superiority had instead revealed American integrity in confronting its own institutional failures. Captain Marcus Webb, Harrison's protégé, the man who had replaced Sarah as squadron leader, approached the F-20 with an expression combining confusion and growing understanding. His family connection to the Lockheed Martin executive had made him an unwitting participant in the conspiracy. His rapid promotion and prestigious assignment, designed to provide cover for his brother's industrial espionage activities. Sarah, Webb said, his voice carrying the weight of someone whose world had just been redefined. I had no idea about any of this. The squadron assignment, the demonstration schedule, I thought it was based on performance evaluations. Sarah studied his face carefully, her test pilot training enabling her to read stress indicators and deception patterns with scientific precision. Webb's shock appeared genuine, his involvement apparently limited to accepting benefits without understanding their corrupt origins. His career would be damaged by association, but his ignorance might protect him from criminal prosecution. The squadron will need new leadership, Sarah said simply. Someone who understands that excellence isn't negotiable and that politics has no place in cockpit decisions. The implication was clear: Webb's assignment had been based on corruption rather than competence, and his future in military aviation would depend on proving himself worthy of responsibilities that had been granted prematurely. Sarah felt no satisfaction in his humiliation, only professional acknowledgement. That merit would finally determine advancement rather than family connections and corporate manipulation. Technical. Sergeant Chun was led away by military police. His role as the sabotage operations technical executor, having been documented through electronic surveillance and forensic evidence. His cooperation with the conspiracy had been motivated by promises of advancement and civilian employment opportunities. That would never materialize now that his criminal involvement had been exposed. Chun's expertise had made the sabotage possible, but his lack of understanding regarding its ultimate purpose had made him a disposable tool in Harrison's larger scheme. Dr. Marcus Webb's arrest attracted particular attention from news organizations and foreign intelligence services. His corporate position and family connections creating implications that extended far beyond military aviation. Lockheed Martin would face congressional investigation, federal prosecution, and international scrutiny that could threaten their participation in cooperative defense programs with allied nations. The company's stock price had already begun dropping. As news of the arrest spread through financial markets, federal investigators began the complex process of examining the F-20's sabotage devices, their sophisticated design requiring specialized knowledge that suggested involvement by personnel with access to classified technical specifications. The devices represented a level of engineering sophistication that pointed towards systematic development rather than improvised solutions, indicating that similar sabotage operations had likely been conducted against other aircraft and other pilots. As the afternoon progressed, the Thunder Bay Air Show transformed from celebration to investigation, with scheduled demonstrations canceled to allow federal agents to process evidence and interview witnesses. International visitors found themselves participating in depositions that would become evidence in prosecutions spanning multiple jurisdictions. The event that was supposed to showcase American aviation capabilities had instead revealed American determination to confront corruption regardless of its institutional consequences. Sarah spent hours providing detailed testimony about her investigation, her discoveries, and her preparation for the morning's flight. Her evidence would anchor prosecutions that could result in decades of imprisonment for the primary conspirators and fundamental changes in defense procurement oversight. But her most significant contribution wasn't legal, it was professional, demonstrating that individual competence and integrity could triumph over institutional corruption when combined with courage and preparation. Late in the afternoon, as investigators continued processing evidence and news organizations broadcast updates to global audiences, Sarah found herself standing beside the F-20 Tiger Shark, its fuselage still warm from the morning's flight. The aircraft had performed flawlessly despite deliberate sabotage, its backup systems and manual controls proving that thoughtful engineering could overcome even sophisticated attempts at destruction. Rodriguez joined her beside the aircraft, his expression mixing relief with professional satisfaction. "Think they'll let you keep flying her?" he asked, nodding toward the F-20. Sarah smiled, her first genuine expression of happiness in months. The aircraft represented more than transportation, it was vindication, proof that excellence could not be suppressed by politics or eliminated by conspiracy. "I think," she said, "that depends on whether they're ready for a pilot who refuses to accept limitations imposed by people who've never earned the right to set them." The F-20 Tiger Shark had carried her beyond the reach of corruption, and she had no intention of landing in anyone else's definition of what was possible. 6 months after the Thunder Bay Air Show exposed one of the largest defense contractor conspiracies in military history, Captain Sarah Mitchell stood in a very different hangar, surrounded by very different aircraft. The test pilot facility at Edwards Air Force Base hummed with the purposeful energy of cutting-edge aviation development, where experimental aircraft pushed the boundaries of human flight and engineering innovation. The F-20 Tiger Shark occupied a place of honor in the center of the facility, no longer a forgotten museum piece, but the centerpiece of a renewed experimental flight program. Sarah's congressional testimony had sparked a fundamental restructuring of defense procurement oversight, creating new safeguards against the kind of corruption that had nearly cost her life. Her technical expertise and uncompromising integrity had made her the obvious choice to lead the reformed test pilot program, where merit rather than politics would determine advancement and where excellence would be measured by performance rather than connections. The morning briefing included representatives from multiple allied nations, their presence indicating how thoroughly the Thunder Bay revelations had reshaped international defense cooperation. Foreign military officials who had witnessed Sarah's demonstration had returned to their home countries with detailed reports about both American aviation capabilities and American commitment to institutional integrity. Several nations had requested participation in joint development programs that would have been impossible under the corruption-tainted relationships of the previous system. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah addressed the assembled group, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose competence had been tested under the most extreme circumstances. "Today's evaluation will demonstrate advanced maneuvering capabilities that represent the next generation of fighter aircraft development. The F-20 program has been revived specifically to explore technologies that were suppressed by political considerations rather than technical limitations." The aircraft behind her bore little resemblance to the dusty museum piece she had discovered in Hangar 7. Extensive modifications had transformed the F-20 into a technological demonstrator that incorporated lessons learned from decades of fighter development, creating a platform that could outperform aircraft costing 10 times as much to develop. The revival of the program represented vindication not just for Sarah, but for every engineer and test pilot whose innovations had been sacrificed to corporate politics and procurement corruption. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez, now promoted to Master Sergeant and serving as Sarah's senior maintenance officer, completed final pre-flight checks with the meticulous attention to detail that had made him invaluable during their investigation of the sabotage conspiracy. His role in exposing the corruption had earned him recognition throughout the Air Force maintenance community, where his technical expertise and ethical courage had become legendary among personnel who understood the pressures that could compromise professional integrity. "All systems check out perfectly, Captain," Rodriguez reported, his smile reflecting genuine pride in aircraft that represented engineering excellence rather than corporate compromise. "Engine parameters are nominal, flight controls respond normally, and all backup systems are fully operational." The backup systems that had saved Sarah's life during the Thunder Bay demonstration had been refined and integrated into standard operating procedures for all experimental aircraft, ensuring that future test pilots would have multiple redundancies available during high-risk flight evaluation. Her survival had contributed to safety improvements that would protect countless pilots in situations where primary systems failed or were compromised. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, Kevin Chun's sister and a brilliant aerospace engineer who had spent years fighting the same corporate politics that had corrupted her brother, approached the aircraft with technical documentation that represented the culmination of decades of suppressed research. Her appointment as lead engineer for the revived F-20 program demonstrated the Air Force's commitment to merit-based selection rather than family connections or political considerations. "Sarah," Dr. Chun said, her voice reflecting both professional respect and personal gratitude, "the modifications we've implemented based on your flight test data have exceeded every performance prediction. The aircraft is ready to demonstrate capabilities that will redefine fighter aircraft development for the next generation." The irony wasn't lost on either woman. The conspiracy that had tried to destroy Sarah's career and eliminate her testimony had instead created conditions that allowed suppressed technologies to flourish and overlooked talent to achieve recognition. Kevin Chun's criminal involvement had initially threatened his sister's career prospects, but her expertise and integrity had ultimately earned her opportunities that political connections could never have provided. Sarah climbed into the F-20's cockpit for what would be her most important flight since Thunder Bay, but under circumstances that transformed demonstration into celebration rather than survival into execution. The international audience included defense ministers, aerospace executives, and congressional representatives who understood that they were witnessing the rebirth of American aviation excellence based on transparency rather than corruption. The Pre-flight procedures unfolded with the precision of a symphony, each system check confirming the integration of human expertise and mechanical perfection that define successful test flight operations. But unlike her previous flight in this aircraft, Sarah felt no apprehension about sabotage or conspiracy, only the pure anticipation of pushing extraordinary technology to its designed limits. The takeoff was smooth and powerful, the F-20 climbing into California skies with enthusiasm that seemed to celebrate its liberation from museum status and return to its intended role as a technological pioneer. Sarah felt the aircraft respond to her inputs with the eager compliance that characterized machines designed by engineers who understood the marriage between human capability and mechanical performance. The demonstration sequence showcased capabilities that would have been impossible under the politically constrained development programs of the previous system. Sarah pushed the F-20 through maneuvers that demonstrated its superiority to aircraft costing hundreds of millions more to develop, proving that innovation and engineering excellence could triumph over bloated budgets and corporate influence. When freed from political interference, but the flight's significance extended beyond technical demonstration. International observers documented performance capabilities that would influence their nation's defense planning for decades, while domestic audiences witnessed proof that American aviation could achieve unprecedented excellence when integrity replaced corruption as the foundation for development decisions. As Sarah brought the F-20 back for landing, she reflected on the journey that had transformed her from a forgotten security guard into the leader of America's most advanced flight test program. The conspiracy that had tried to destroy her had instead revealed strengths she hadn't known she possessed, while the aircraft that was supposed to be her tomb had become the instrument of her vindication. The landing was perfect, a gentle touchdown that seemed to symbolize the successful conclusion of a mission that had begun in the shadows of Hangar 7 and culminated in the spotlight of international recognition. As the canopy opened and Sarah prepared to face the assembled crowd of officials and media representatives, she understood that her story had become more than personal redemption. It had become proof that excellence could not be suppressed and that truth would ultimately triumph over even the most sophisticated corruption. Rodriguez was the first to reach the aircraft, his broad smile reflecting shared satisfaction in a mission accomplished and justice achieved. Behind him, Dr. Chun carried performance data that would reshape fighter aircraft development, while federal investigators documented evidence of technological capabilities that had been deliberately suppressed by corporate interests. But Sarah's greatest satisfaction came from knowing that her example had inspired others throughout the military and defense industry to prioritize competence over politics, integrity over convenience, and truth over temporary advantage. The pilots and engineers who would follow her would inherit systems reformed by her courage and institutions strengthened by her refusal to accept corruption as inevitable. As evening descended over Edwards Air Force Base, Sarah stood beside the F-20 Tiger Shark and watched the sun set over the Mojave Desert, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of the dawn she had faced in Hangar 7 when her future seemed limitless in its bleakness. The aircraft beside her represented more than technological achievement. It embodied the principle that individual excellence, when combined with institutional integrity, could overcome any obstacle and achieve any goal. The woman who had been left to guard a hangar had instead guarded something far more precious, the principle that in America, merit would ultimately triumph over manipulation, and that those with the courage to stand for truth would find themselves lifted by wings, strong enough to carry them beyond the reach of those who mistook position for power. Sarah Mitchell had not just won an air show, she had won back the soul of American aviation. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.